Hi everyone, Nura Rachelle here, and welcome to part 2 of Transforming with the Transits. Today it's going to be about Venus and Mars, and I think this is really perfect because we have Mars at 17 degrees Libra and Venus at 27 degrees Scorpio the day that I'm recording this, and that is a new phase novile. And so there's a lot gestating right now, especially in the collective consciousness around new patterns of relating, and especially as we come into the interpersonal time of year, actually nearing the end of that in Scorpio season. We've already come through Libra and Virgo, soon to come into the transpersonal community houses, Sagittarius through Pisces, or community season. This is the time when we start to really confront anything that is limiting in our patterns of relating, especially with Venus and Scorpio. This is the work that we have been doing, so you're probably already feeling into that. So why Mars and Venus? Why are we looking at these two as a planetary pair? They're one of the core planetary pairs that basically in any field of astrology you're going to be looking at, but especially in evolutionary astrology, this is important because it's how we actually come to know ourselves and see ourselves in relationships. So this is love language meets desire nature. Love language being Venus, desire nature being Mars. I've kind of got them switched with the glyphs here. Point of attraction, Venus, and action language, Mars. Feelings, Venus. Usually our reactions to do we get what we want or not, which is that Mars piece, but this is how they come together. And then that instinctual nature, which is Mars. And I want to preface this with just a general understanding that our Mars nature and our desire nature is something that is pretty culturally conditioned, and oftentimes very repressed. And this goes for men and women. And this is why we see a lot of the unhealthy or violent expressions of Mars, or that sort of anger that comes. But a lot of it stems from this conditioning and repression of the authenticity of our desire nature, that pure instinctual force that comes from creation. And so this is important to understand about yourself also when just taking that into consideration in this whole conversation, because there might be certain aspects of your own Mars language that you may not fully understand just based on conditioning. So it's always good to look at that, especially right now since we've got the Saturn Pluto South Node in Capricorn. We're all really shedding and purging the cultural conditioning. So we're also looking at love and sexuality here, divine masculine and divine feminine, the you and me aspects of relationships, and really how do I come to understand your needs and wants, and how do I express to you my needs and wants, and how are we sort of dancing in this relationship in a healthy way, really releasing any need for codependency or control in a relationship. And so essentially, when you take Mars and Venus together as a planetary pair, this is how we meet our needs, our essential relationship needs, and those of our relationships. Because our relationships have their own needs. As you'll notice, when you come together with a different person, all of a sudden, what is being met is different when you're with another person, because it's creating this entirely new entity, this third entity. This is when we can look at our composite chart, right? This is when you and me come together, and this is that third new being. This is sort of what we can become and work through together. So really, just to get to know Venus and Mars even more, Mars is desire nature. This is lower octave of Pluto. This is leading edge of evolution. So this is the force within us that initiates forward motion and the momentum on our evolutionary path. We need Mars to become what we are here to become. And again, this is that primal, authentic urge, that divine spark of creativity that when repressed can go funky, right? Can go kind of violent, or can go in any manner of directions that can manifest in an unhealthy way. But when we are on point with our Mars and desire nature, it is really what leads us to the evolutionary desires of the soul, being that lower octave of Pluto. And then Venus is the lower octave of Neptune, right? And so that's human love with divine love. But Venus is our point of attraction and our inner and outer needs, our relationship with ourself and others. And this is also the evaluation of self and others, and sort of how do I evaluate your value system, and how does that contrast with my own? And then how does this relationship actually help me to know myself better? And also know what it is that I can authentically offer in relationship. And this is, again, how we can react to our needs either being met or not being met. And so what do we kind of do? What does that look like? This is the mode of expression of our feelings. I love this quote: "Your perception of me is a reflection of you, and my reaction to you is an awareness of me." And this is perfect. This is that Venus, Mars, how they come together. I think they come together perfectly, and it is emphasized by this quote. Really understanding how are we seeing ourselves and seeing the other in relationship, and how are we reacting to, say, maybe when somebody doesn't fully understand us, or when our needs are not getting met. And that's going to show us a little bit more of ourselves, and how are we meeting our own needs, and where are we on the spectrum of codependency, those kind of things. This is really fascinating, and I won't go too deep into this, but Venus-Mars cycles are very interesting. They have a conjunction every 1 to 2 years in that time frame, and it's a very uncommon pattern, and I'm going to show you some tables that will outline this. But they had an observed sign pattern that was mostly consistent up until 1960, and then something happened, and it continues until 2060, where there's this aberration of the pattern that was observed. And so really, this is something that requires more research, and I'm sure there are people out there who know a lot more about these cycles and mapping them out astronomically than I do. But my curiosity in all of this is, what does this mean for the evolution of our relationships? If, there's this consistent pattern, or maybe a portion of a pattern, maybe we haven't been looking at this for long enough, or it's not recorded in long enough of a pattern for us to be able to see the bigger pattern. But there's this aberration of about 100 years, and we're part of that. So that directly affects us. And I would like to know what that really means. Certain researchers have suggested that the aberration, where the pattern has changed and there's less consistency, makes it so that we're more likely to repeat patterns and not necessarily learn from them, which is, a thought, a potential that this might contribute to the increased rates of divorce, and people just, being in serial monogamy, where, you get with one person, you get to that edge of evolution of what you're willing to work on, and then you break up. And then you just go and find another person and just keep doing the same thing without really learning or growing or evolving the patterns of relating. And so that is really fascinating to me. And to me, that's why I'm even studying astrology in the first place, is to understand my patterns of life and mastering those cycles. And this is a great article that you can learn more about the specifics and some of the research. And this I found on the School of Evolutionary Astrology message board. And so if you haven't been playing around on there, get involved, because there's a lot of good information there and really good conversations. And so here's what I was talking about. This is one of the ephemerides of the Venus-Mars conjunctions. And so what you'll notice here, especially here in these two final columns, you'll see the R for retrograde. And this is showing this pattern of when they are conjuncting and Venus is retrograde and Mars is direct. And they were noticing that that was happening every 5 conjunctions or so. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that was happening again. So there's, 4 in between, retrograde, 4 in between, retrograde, 4 in between, retrograde, right? This was happening like clockwork. And there are tables like this on this website that you can go and see more. I'm just looking at 1901 to 2000 in this. But you can go back, I think, for 3,000 years or something like that. And so, you see how everything's all normal. You can see the pattern and it's making sense. And you come over here, again, seeing the pattern. And then what happens here after 1946? Oh, we expected to have, four in between in that five, but then we don't. And, what's going on in here? There's like 4 extra conjunctions before Venus is retrograde in a conjunction with Mars. And now we don't have this happening until 1959. And then look over here, there's 6 in between and then a retrograde. And then there's like 10 in between and a retrograde and 10 in between and then a retrograde. And then now we're in 2000s again, like 10 in between retrograde. And so, and these numbers are not consistent. There's like 7 here, 8 or 9 here, 10 here. And then what happens at 2041, we go back to that like retrograde, form between retrograde, and I think there's still some more aberrations, and then it goes back to 6 or 7 and like 8, 9 here. I'm not counting exactly, but I'm just demonstrating this so that you can just start to feel into this pattern. We've got not again until 2060 does the pattern start to regulate itself again. What's up with that? I really want to know. I was reading too on the message board that the Venus-Mars conjunctions and their patterns mimics that of Uranus-Pluto, which is also very fascinating to me. Okay, so let's really ground into the energy behind these transits. When we're looking at Venus transit in general, this is all about the evolution of our inner needs, right? That's that Taurus part of Venus, that inner reflection. And then the outer relationships, and that's that Libra part where we're sort of projecting our needs or seeing them manifest on the outside in terms of our patterns of relating. That's that Taurus and Libra aspect of Venus. And we are going to become aware of new and changing needs throughout the Venus cycle. And so we have, each of us, a Venus return about every year, and it varies in timing and scope, especially dependent on the retrograde cycle of Venus. But we are also part of bigger Venus cycles, right? This is where we can start to get into understanding, the Venus pentagram and those cycles, which I won't get into today. There's some really excellent talks by Tashi Powers that I highly recommend you to connect with if you want to learn more about Venus cycles specifically. But just to understand at its most basic, where Venus is currently transiting, this is going to show how our needs, how our values are shifting, and then how does that manifest itself in our patterns of relating. And so what exact patterns we're working on will be determined by the sign and house and then the relationship to our natal Venus at any given time, right? So I'm Venus in Scorpio, so I'm going through a Venus return as we speak. But say you had Venus in Taurus right now, you'd be going through a Venus opposition. And that's going to happen for everybody every year. We're going to experience the whole cycle from 0 to 360 every year. And we're going to be in these different phasal relationships. And we want to have this awareness of what part of the cycle am I in? Am I in the part where I'm in becoming more instinctually aware of how my needs are changing, right? As I am within this new phase with Venus still in new phase conjunction to my Venus, compared to, are you in that gibbous opposition or full phase opposition where you're finally getting it and it's coming to full fruition and it makes sense and you can see it manifest out in the world? Or are you at that balsamic point? Maybe you have Venus in Sagittarius and Venus is just coming into that balsamic relation with your natal Venus, and you're tying together all of the values that you've been growing into over this past year, and things are starting to make sense, and you're coming to a more spiritual essence of understanding your needs, right? So that's good information to have no matter what. And that's just taking one planet alone. We can do this with every planet, or planetary pairs, as we'll be connecting with today. This can also correlate to so Venus transits can correlate to endings or beginnings or patterns of relating. So when we need to come together based on personal needs, and when those needs become fulfilled or we've outgrown the basis of the relationship, is often when there's a split of some sort. And this doesn't necessarily mean breaking up, especially if you're in the kind of relationship where you are, you know, karma mates, and you're working with each other toward that, you know, potential of becoming soulmates, where you're really just together to help each other fulfill your soul mission, to fulfill your evolutionary intention, right? In that case, you might find that you get to these points where it almost feels like you're going to break up, but then you break through into this new way of relating with each other. It's kind of like it's gotta grow or it's gotta go. That's kind of what happens during, you know, especially the hard aspects, squares, oppositions, and conjunctions as well, in conjuncts with, you know, transiting Venus to natal Venus. You know, it's gotta grow or it's gotta go. And truthfully, the soul cannot stand stagnancy. So in some way, shape, or form, this is going to become manifest if it's meant to be. And then Mars, this is the leading edge of growth and change. This is what we are in the state of becoming. And with these transits, it's going to be specifically activated or triggered or initiated. We're often looking at limitations or things that are perceived as limitations. And when it's related to Mars, this is like a sign to move on in life or to make the new choices that are aligned with actual evolutionary intentions or desires versus, you know, just kind of doing the same thing over again and then being upset that you can't. It's like, oh, this is just a sign to do something else, to do that new thing. And in relationships, this can show up as new forms of self-discovery, right? Like, I'm getting to know myself better. And this will require necessarily a shift in the patterns of relating, especially if you're in a circumstance where, you know, you're growing and the other person's kind of resisting their growth. And then what happens? That can create some friction, some limitation, some anger. And then again, now this becomes a little bit more clear on the overall story when you take Venus and Mars together in this analysis. So let's just build this from the ground up. These are the things that I think you need to know in order to understand how to work with Venus-Mars transits. So of course you need to understand your natal Venus-Mars relationship. Okay, and I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. You also need to be aware of the 12th house and cusp and any planets involved, 2nd house and 7th house, because this creates that yod involving two inconjuncts, you know, 7th house to 12th house and 7th house to 2nd house. Those are both inconjuncts, and then there's that sextile between 12th and 2nd house. This will be more evident when I show it on a chart. But this creates this yod, or this finger of fate, or a finger of God, and it's really showing this sort of ideal form of how we can grow and shift in our patterns of relating. And this makes up what we call our essential relationship needs. And I highly recommend, if you haven't already, to read Pluto Volume 2 by Jeffrey Wolf Green, as he outlines all of this magnificently in that book. So here's this example chart. So Libra on the 12th house cusp. So this person really has a need to find that sort of balance and harmony in relationship to the divine. And so this person, just knowing her, she is pretty balanced, especially in her relationship with herself, kind of like when she's alone and doing her own work. It's this sense of harmony. But what I've also noticed is that she's also overcoming certain fantasies about relationships with other people, because her relationship with the divine manifests in this Libran way, this harmonious way, whereas not all human relationships necessarily manifest that way. And so this is where we're kind of learning to balance that. And there's also this karmic influence as well, as Libra and Libran experiences tend to pull us into sort of the opposite experience or the opposite expression of what we might have lived or experienced before, so that we can see both sides, so that we can understand and see the totality of relating and sort of who we've been and how we have been. And then looking at the 2nd house cusp, being our value system, personal values, that inner side of Venus, how we really know ourselves and what we need, and our personal resources that we have to basically live out our life purpose. That's all what comes to us in this 2nd house. And the sign that you have on the 2nd house cusp is the doorway into that house. And so Sagittarius here on the 2nd house cusp really emphasizes the need for freedom. She highly values freedom. having been able to observe this person over a long period of time, and how she had always a big need for independence, right? Which you could see with other factors in the chart, you know, Pluto in the first and Mars conjunct ascendant and so on. She's a very big freedom lover and needs to do things her own way. And that freedom in relationships is important. But the interesting thing is, once she's committed, she's committed. And I think that really shows up with this, you know, that Scorpio for sure, and the loyalty, and the Capricorn, but that need with Scorpio to really be choosy, to be kind of picky on who she's going to spend her time with, because it's like, once you're in, you're in. Once you're committed, you're committed. And both of those things, they go well together, right? Like, she has a pretty solid spiritual practice that is her own. She's very committed to the work that she does in the world. Of course, South Node in the 10th house here. But she's very practically oriented, and Venus in the 2nd house. So she is very aware of her personal needs and really needs that sort of practical, steady stability. And this also manifests too, having Taurus on the 7th house, the types of partnerships that she attracts. I've seen different levels of attraction where it's, you know, sometimes a situation where the person's actually really chaotic and they're kind of demonstrating some of the Scorpio nature, but those didn't really last that long. And then there's this other kind of person who's very stable and very steady and reliable, and shows her that life can be easy, that life doesn't have to be this intense all the time. And to kind of give her this, you know, a new kind of self-image, to help her integrate her self-image that also includes this Taurian aspect. And so just good information to have, like, how are these signs working together in your chart? What sign do you have on the cusp of these houses? And then how are the planets that are in those houses relating with each other? So this is all good information to have in terms of understanding your essential relationship needs. Now, this would be great if every individual person knew this about themselves. But, you know, if you're looking at other people's charts, you can look at this as well for them, just to give yourself a little bit of an understanding of what they are working on. And you can also do this with composite charts, right? Like, what's that third entity? What are the relationship needs of the third entity, that whole relationship? And so you do the exact same thing. So this is just a recap of what I said, looking at 2nd house, personal needs, resources. 7th house, projection of self onto others. Also, what is our constructed persona? That 7th house is often linked to a lot of our conditioning as well. Kind of, who do we think we need to be for others and in relationships, and can kind of show us in what ways we might be codependent as well. And this is really looking at the mirroring that occurs in relationships, and in what way can we actually integrate the energy in the 7th house instead of projecting it. And then 12th house, this is the ideal of our relationships based on our relationship with the divine. So it tends to be also something that is projected. And then it's like, oh, when this human doesn't live up to this beautiful, idealized relationship that we've had with the divine, we get a little bit, you know, we have to make some adjustments based on reality. And so that's also something that you see when you're looking at this yod here. These two inconjuncts supported by a sextile. Really, the sextile, specifically 12th house and 2nd house, is what helps solve the riddle or smooth over the adjustments that need to be made via the two inconjuncts, because they understand each other. It's like our sort of spiritualized and ideal form of relating with the divine actually becomes the basis of our relationship with ourself. And then when we're able to meet our own needs, we're not projecting as much those needs onto other people so that other people can meet them. So that's how we can use this. Okay. So just another bit of examples from that example chart. Looks like I pretty much covered all of this. So just in case you're newer to astrology or looking at phasal relationships, which is different than aspects, but aspects are sort of couched within the understanding of phasal relationships, this is an excellent diagram, and I got this from Linda at the School of Evolutionary Astrology.com message board. Again, highly recommend. So you take the slower moving planet, with, in this case, is Mars, and you place that planet as though they're at the 0 degree mark, at the conjunction spot. And then you see where is Venus, and you count going this way in this counterclockwise counting method. And you look, oh, here she is at this 120 degree mark. This is a trine. And this itself, this little, it's like a pie slice out of 8. This is the first quarter phase, right? This is the first quarter square. Whoops. But as we are on this side of it, this is crescent phase, and then over here it's first quarter phase. And this mirrors the same relationship that we know really easily and commonly with sun and moon, right? Like this being new moon when both sun and moon are here, this being first quarter, this being full moon, right? Or when they're in opposition, or that last quarter, and then you can do the exact same thing with any planets. And there are quite a few videos that emphasize this if this is newer to you, but this can help you just to be able to do this with your own Mars and Venus in your chart. And so just understanding, okay, so your patterns of relating, if this applies to you, is very much about understanding this crisis and action point, because that's what the first quarter phase really represents. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this newly emerging need, or this newly emerging value? Because everything in this waxing half tends to be like you're just getting used to it, you're learning how to put it into practice, whereas once you've hit the opposition or the full phase, you're starting to like fully integrate it here and then use it out in society, and now you're coming back to yourself. You're kind of like, I don't know if I need to be so conditioned by this, and now I'm kind of trying to let it go and fully bring it to completion so that I can, at this conjunction point again, perhaps in another life, have a new desire or a new need that I will get to use my time on Earth to play out and consciously evolve through. And so here's another example just to show, again, starting with Mars as a slower moving planet going around the circle fully. And here we go. Venus is in this balsamic phase, semi-sextile, so 30 degrees away. And this balsamic phase, like I mentioned, is about the spiritualization of the patterns of relating, especially when we're talking about Venus-Mars together. Okay, so back to our example chart. So let's look at the phasal relationship of Venus-Mars. And so here we've got them in this sextile, right? 6 degrees Scorpio in the first house, 8 degrees Capricorn in the second house. This is a beautiful sextile between Venus-Mars. And so that crescent phase sextile is really about opportunity. It's about sort of karmic choice points as what we decide and what we start to build and establish in this phase is what becomes this basis of karmic fruition in a later life, right? So this person is really in a place of like deciding and making choices about what her needs are and how to manifest this outwardly in relationship in this life. And then how does it link to, you know, what does she really want? Like all of these planets in her first house, especially Mars conjunct the ascendant, she spent a lot of time in her life, this life, not always 100% sure of exactly what she wants, not always 100% sure on what she needs, because this is personal development. She's developing that, she's getting to know it. And when it's in that crescent phase, it's just one, you know, little pie slice beyond the new phase. She just came out of the new phase where it was that place of instinctual awareness, and now it's more of that yin reflection energy in this crescent phase sextile. And so this is where she gets to reflect on the choices that she wants to make throughout the rest of the cycle. And we obviously, this is what we're sticking with for our whole life. And when I say in the rest of the cycle, I'm referring to potential, you know, future lives, non-linearly speaking, you know, other lifetimes and other dimensions and those sorts of things. But this is what she's working with now. And so she does require a lot of independence and space and freedom with Mars on her ascendant. And she does require to be able to take care of herself, to be able to, you know, create her own abundance and resource base, which she definitely has. And you look at this beautiful South Node of the 10th house. She's a nurse and she knew what she wanted to do out of high school. And she's been doing it successfully ever since university. And interestingly, only now she recently had a baby. And you know, looking at, which I'll get into soon, that original conjunction between Venus and Mars happened in her 10th house. And so all of this for her, as I'll demonstrate later, is about reviewing and reevaluating her value system based on what shifts she needs to make in career, based on having a different family structure and having to really, you know, look at the relationships in her career and just having to show up in that space in a different way and kind of purify her needs and values so that she's able to do all the things that she needs. And of course, you know, seeing this North Node in the 4th house, this is really, this is a big part of her her overall evolutionary intention. This karmic axis is just very much based on finding this balance between work and home. Okay. So in this example chart, like I mentioned, she's got Venus in the crescent phase sextile to Mars. And so this is a yin phase. So all of the phases, they go back and forth, yang, yin. So yang in the first new phase, yin, yang, and around the circle. And this yin phase is a phase of struggle. It's where you're still not entirely sure, and it requires a lot of reflection to understand needs and to actualize them and really learn how to be aware of them and express them not only internally, but also in the realm of relationship with others. So it's kind of like this come together, come apart, come together, come apart a little bit, especially in the patterns that I've observed with her, where she, you know, with the same person coming together and then coming apart, and now they're married, and now there's, you know, a deeper level of commitment, and they have a child together, but still that energy of just having that awareness in herself that she needs space to reflect, even within that marriage, is what is going to create longevity. What's going to make the patterns of relating and sort of the, you know, she's Scorpio rising, Scorpio sun. She's doing a lot of transformation and metamorphosing in this life. So to have space to do that, and then to be able to be held safely in the relationship, because the relationship is this place of steadiness and stability, without creating codependency, or without, you know, more than anything, the other person kind of becoming dependent on her and her always having to be the leader and so on. So, you know, like I mentioned before, she spent much of her time in her, you know, teens and early 20s, even mid 20s, only really casually dating or being single or in these on-off relationships, because she just wanted to be really practical. Look at that Capricorn stellium in her 2nd house. Look at that moon in Taurus. And those things really sort of balanced out the intensity of her personal transformation that was happening with the Scorpio stellium. Okay. So hopefully that can give you a nice sort of overview of the basics of what you're looking at. And this is just looking at Mars, Venus, and 12th house, 2nd house, 7th house to get this information, the bulk of this information. And of course, in evolutionary astrology, you always want to have your eye open and just to have the Pluto and nodal axis in your awareness. But then really, once you're on top of that, you can start to see, okay, these are her relationship needs, and how are they being met in relationship with another. So this is another chart that demonstrates those phasal relationships. And this is from Kim Marie Weimer, who adapted it from Jeffrey Wolf Green, who had his inspiration from Dane Rudyard, in how Dane Rudyard compared sun and moon and those phasal relationships. And then Jeffrey Wolf Green adapted it for all planets. And then now it is widely used in EA. Okay, so this is going a little bit deeper than that. So for one, you need to know, okay, what phasal relationship is your natal Mars and Venus in this? And that's just going to give you the general energy. But now look, we've got all these other aspects within. And so I tried to give tiny little keywords on these, because you could go a lot deeper than what I've gone through here. But just to have that awareness, like if you have Venus new phase conjunction to Mars, this is a new pattern of relating that's being seeded. very different than if you have Venus balsamic conjunction to Mars, where you're tying together all the old patterns and taking a look at all the old karma and relationships and completing it. It's totally different, right? So to understand, are you in balsamic phase conjunction or new phase conjunction is night and day when understanding your Venus-Mars relationship. So we move from this beginning place of this new pattern or this new need or this new value that is being seeded in how we're going to play that out in our relationship with self and other and with life and our self-discovery and so on. And then, it starts to take root. And in this new phase semi-sextile, we start to have these opportunities for growth, and our awareness is growing of our personal needs and self-discovery, and it becomes more serious. And then we move into the semi-square, which is, the semi-squares and the sesquiquadrates, those are like transition points. So they tend to be pretty challenging points, especially when you're moving from the yang to the yin or the yin to the yang. And so here, depending on if you're the new side or the crescent side of the semi-square, this is going to be deeper personal reflection on your needs and wants and your point of attraction. You're really going to be, in this struggle. And of course, if you have this phase and you're used to it, it might not feel like a struggle and you might just be used to it. But the purpose of that is to just really understand the self and the needs and the pattern. And to be able to give yourself, especially if you're in that yin phase, the time to reflect. Versus when you're in the yang phase, you can get away with a little bit more like, I'm just going to be free and explore. And we start to move into that crescent phase sextile like we have in our example. And so this is an ease of reflection. This is opportunities found in personal reflection and a choice point that determines the course of the rest of the cycle. And then first quarter square, crisis in action. You're more determined with action because it's pretty clear to you now what you need, right? It's the same as when you start to see the moon in that first quarter square, the half of the moon is lit up. So there's a lot more conscious awareness of what's going on. And you're a little bit, you care a little bit less about what others need and think because you're just focusing on doing and establishing what you need for yourself at this place. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but you could take a screenshot of this and consider this for yourself. This is important too. I'll mention, the gibbous in conjunct. This is kind of like that Virgo space where there's a lot of reflection and refining and finding humility in the expression of your needs. And then we've got that gibbous phase opposition, which again is very different than the full phase opposition. Oh, interesting. What's happening here? Oh no, I did two of the same. Anyways, if you want more information on this, please let me know and I can hopefully, give you these slides or we can connect on, other avenues of learning. But basically what's happening on the other side of this is, at that opposition, we're coming more to that meaning, completion, seeing the manifestation of our needs and wants and desires out in the open, it's publicly. And so now that we know ourselves, we're a lot more concerned about knowing the other. Once we start to get into the full phase oppositions, full phase in conjuncts, right? Full phase, and then moving into disseminating phase, sesquiquadra, and so on. And then that last quarter square, last quarter sextile, and then the balsamic phase where we're tying it all together. Okay, so that's just another example of that. So this is yet another level of analysis that you can add. And this is fairly simple. Don't let it freak you out if you're not that well versed in planetary nodes yet, because it's very easy to find this information. If you have solar fire, you can easily find this in solar fire. And also I think Steve Wolfson on the EA message board gives instructions on how to program solar fire to include planetary nodes. I don't have solar fire, so I just use a website that I'll share with you in a moment, which I also find easy. And then I just, either memorize where the points are in the chart, or, go in with another tool and sort of like draw them in kind of thing. So in the example chart, I was able to find that her Venus in Capricorn, the north node of Venus in Capricorn in her chart is 5 degrees Libra, and the south node is 0 degrees Sagittarius. So what on earth does that mean? Similar to the moon and the north and south nodes of the moon, this is how we are manifesting and expressing what has come before, what we've already worked on. It's kind of what we're integrating from, past expression and future expression that's emerging. So same as that south to north node journey of the moon. But in this case, it's just about Venus. So when it comes to the patterns of relating, she's really coming from a big emphasis on freedom, perhaps a very nomadic life, or where there was, a very expansive and open and freedom-based idea of what it meant to be in relationships, coming from that space, and also understanding the natural law of relationships, because that's Sagittarius, the natural law of her point of attraction and harmony. And she's moving toward, within that Capricorn archetype, towards a more Libran energy, which is interesting, right? You remember her chart, she's got the stellium in the first and second house. She's very much about her own personal development, yet she's got that 5 degrees Libra, and this is actually happening in her, I think in her 11th house actually, but then she's got Libra on that 12th house cusp. So again, this is kind of pushing it out into the community. She's got a lot of friends. She's got a lot of acquaintances. She's very popular. And I believe that this, in her case, is this sort of opening to be able to have more of what she actually needs, and in a Capricornian sense of personal security, because she's got a lot of options. This is kind of that integration point of, freedom of Sagittarius, and then really going out into more relationships with that north node of Venus in Libra. So this is a totally deeper understanding of our natal Venus. We want to know this for our natal Venus. We want to know this for transiting Venus and Mars. And so in the example chart, her Mars is in Scorpio, but the Mars's north node is 20 degrees Taurus. So the north node of Mars is opposing Mars. That's interesting, right? That really points to a big piece of integration. I believe it's a gibbous phase opposition from her natal Mars. And then Mars's south node is 19 degrees Scorpio, so the same sign as the Mars. So that's really interesting. And so it's like this integration of what she needs to, in terms of understanding who she is as, the Scorpionic being that she is with that Scorpio stellium, and also her physical body and her instinctual nature. And she's integrating sort of this awareness of herself as this transformative, powerful being. But then she's moving towards this more enlightened, finding peace and calm and harmony with herself, especially also having that Pluto polarity point pretty close to this Mars north node. So it's showing again what she's working through and to in order to find integration. It's not about leaving the south node behind, but it's about integrating it in a healthy way that includes the north node, the polarity. Well, for the moon, it's the polarity point. For Venus and Mars, they're not opposite most of the time. Sometimes with Mars they are, but most often not with Venus, I believe. And they change month to month with the fast motion of Venus and Mars, so they could be different for everybody. I believe that for Mars, since it's on the outside of Earth, that there's that everybody has their north and south node of Mars within a few signs, but not the case with Venus. It could be any sign. Okay, so this is the website that you can look to find the north and south node of any celestial body. So what you would do if you're looking for Venus and Mars is you'll just type it in here. So here is the web address, truenode.com, EPH1. And so grateful to these technology wizards who made this years ago. This is really how many of the charts used to be created, and then by hand. I'm so in awe of this. So you would take, Venus and Mars and any other planetary bodies you want to know the north and south node of. You put in the date that you want. So I just put in the date of the approximate recording of this workshop, and then I just left the time as 0 for now, but you would put in your birth time and then adjust this to the time zone that you're born in. Especially be sure to know if it's like standard time or daylight time at the time that you're born. I tend to put just like one number of lines. Otherwise, you could get like 30 and it'll just show year by year by year what's happening on the same day, which is an interesting thing to do and play with. So I encourage you to play with this. Keep it checked. I think it automatically does as show longitude. And then make sure that you click star here and north and south node. So of course you can use your birthday to find your natal planetary nodes, but you can do this for any date to see transits. And then what you want to do is layer the transits onto the natal chart and compare. And so this is where we currently have the north node of Venus is 20 degrees Virgo and south node 23 degrees Scorpio, right on my Venus. Whoa, it's really feeling that way. And then Mars 12 Gemini and 14 Scorpio. Wow, right on my Pluto. This is getting fun. Okay, so this is the example used of the example chart. This is where I got that information. And then so I just used my handy illustration tool to add this, north node of Venus in 5 degrees Libra. So yes, in her 11th house, this south node of Venus, 0 Sagittarius. South node 19 Scorpio, north node 20 Taurus. And so you can see now a deeper picture of what's going on with these relationship needs. So I won't say much more on that, but you get the idea. Do this for yourself. That will start to build up your understanding of your patterns of relating and needs. Another thing you need to know is, what is the original conjunction? And so the OC, or the original conjunction, you want to look at where the most recent Venus-Mars conjunction occurred by sign and house placement. So currently, if you're watching this in 2019 or 2020, or even the first half of 2021, this will apply. It was August 24th at 4 degrees Virgo. And so this is going all the way up until July of 2021. And so we can now take that as its own sort of fixed point in our minds and then look at this relationship as it's unfolding over the coming year and a half, basically. And then reflect on this generally in relationship to your natal Venus and Mars. And then on top of that, look at how they are transiting through their own cycle together through the transits in relation to your Venus and Mars. So now we've got a lot more we're working with. And so hopefully it's not too confusing. Take it little bits, but this is, it's important to keep in mind that while Venus and Mars are shifting through the signs and through the cycle, their original intention is that 4 degrees in Virgo. So really purifying the needs, right? What does Virgo mean to you? This is the purification. This is reconnecting to the divine feminine. This is, that sense of caretaking and being in your right role of service, and now applying all of that within the realm of relationships. And then looking at specifically how this is manifesting where you have 4 degrees Virgo in your chart. And so that will give you, that's the area of your life that you're purifying to this level to basically become more saintly in that area of your life in regards to your patterns of relating. And now everything that we do in this cycle, moving beyond that, will all be coming back to that, because that was the intention behind Mars and Venus coming together originally. Okay. So this is that day, that time. It happened August 24th at 9:36 a.m. And there's also an EA Zoom meeting that talks more about this if you want to explore that. So this Venus-Mars conjunction at 4 degrees, 6 minutes Virgo. And then we could dissect this entire chart as well to understand, okay, look at these sesquiquadrats to, Saturn, South Node, and Pluto. Right? That's important to consider. Looking at the trine between Venus, Mars, and Uranus in Taurus. This is also really awakening to sort of what are the patterns and what needs to change in our routine in relationship, because sometimes relationships becomes very routine. We just kind of grab onto a pattern or a modality of relating that we like, or that feels comfortable, or that we're used to, and we get it, and then we just stay there. But then that's when things become stagnant and then we feel like we need to change. But if we can incorporate that Uranian nature from the beginning in this original conjunction and into our understanding of what is wanting to be purified, then we can actually, choose the change before change chooses us, and just get on board with the evolutionary intention of Venus, Mars, and Virgo in our own lives, in our own charts, in our own expression and experience, and so on. Look at this, in conjunct to Chiron, same thing. And it's retrograde. Both of these planets are retrograde at this time. And so what is being redefined about our routines and how we individuate within the realm of relationships? What is being redefined in terms of how our personal healing and self-discovery, that Aries piece, and how does that come into relationship healing? So we really need to have self-awareness of how we are liberating ourselves from our own conditioning and coming into new and greater awareness of who we really are and how this shows up in relationship. This is also fun to know too. So we can look at the Sabian symbols. And so you'll notice, okay, this was 4 degrees Virgo, but in the Sabian symbols, you look to the degree number after because they start 0 degrees at 1. So it all shifts back in 1 degree. So this phase 155, or Virgo, the 5th degree, is a man becoming aware of nature spirits and normally unseen spiritual agencies. Pretty cool. Dane Rudyard has some interpretations of this in his book, An Astrological Mandala, which you can also find easily online and in books. And I highly recommend just to check that out. And then also you can go into your own natal Venus and Mars and look at what are the Sabian symbols for your Venus and Mars. And so I love the way that the Sabian symbols came about. It was a psychic woman and a man, and in this moment I'm blanking on their names. I think it's Mark Edmund Jones. And why does this happen? I always forget the woman's psychic's name. My cultural conditioning, I apologize, but you can find it via Dane Rudyard because he makes these interpretations. But she was psychic, and what they did was basically, like he would write down in random order on these cards that were all labeled with the degree points, and then she would give this little sentence based on the images that she was seeing, and then that's how the Sabian symbols came about. And then when they put them together, they're like, wow, this actually makes sense. Like each image would follow the next in this sequential order that then put the whole zodiac into a story. So you can look at this for any degree point and then, apply the function and the expression of each planet to this and gain a little bit more information. So when I'm thinking about, Venus, Mars coming together at this Sabian symbol, a man becoming aware of nature spirits and normally unseen spiritual agencies, perhaps that's all of us coming into, greater understanding of the myriads of worlds that are around us, of perhaps the magic and the power of that divine feminine that we're coming into with Virgo. And, when I think of Virgo too, that yin mutable earth, I often think of like fairies and connecting with the elementals and the spirits. And so maybe there's that energy of kind of pulling in that natural magic into our relationships. And so this is the north and south node of the Venus-Mars conjunction. And so we've got north node of Venus at 1 degree Leo and south node 11 Libra, and north node of Mars 27 Gemini and south node 20 Libra. And they've since moved since then, but when we're looking at this original conjunction, this is like the energy that is like stamped. It's like an energetic time stamp that carries through the whole cycle. So, okay, we look at, the north node of Mars being 27 Gemini. Really, we're learning how to communicate about this process of self-discovery and perhaps have an openness and releasing. So the south node maybe is releasing an over focus on perhaps what other people think, right? Or, anywhere that we've sort of been attached or become codependent on needing somebody else to tell us what we want or who we are. And we're coming more into this exploratory phase of like, oh, this is who I am. Oh, I'm so curious. Oh, I'd like to learn more about that. Oh, I'm totally comfortable being in don't know mind and beginner's mind and learning all that I can. So that's kind of how I view Gemini. very curious and open, compared to, you know, oh, Libra's a little bit more seasoned, kind of knows better, knows more, coming from that space of, hey, oh, you over there, can you tell me who I am? Totally different vibes, but still air signs. So I would, in any case, say looking at this in the realm of personal analysis, really bringing it into the self, especially because the nature of Virgo is that internal reflection and analysis. And where do you have maybe other people's voices contributing to that analysis? And how can you just come into a little bit more curiosity and release any like dogmas of truth, or, you know, overviews or overlays, and come into your own experiential understanding of your self-discovery. The North Node of Venus, 1 degree Leo, South Node also Libra. So I would just second everything that I just said about, you know, our patterns of relating. And it's not to say that we're letting go of the Libra strengths, because as we know, Libra really carries the torch for a lot of our understanding of relating, and the patterns and our needs and so on, and really understanding the other. But maybe, and this is something for you to ponder in yourself, and looking at where these points are in Libra in your chart, in what ways are you releasing certain voices of others from your understanding of your needs and your values? Where are you releasing other people's values to come more into your own, especially with North Node of Venus being 1 degree Leo for this original conjunction? This is very much about like personal expression. And so then if you take them together, 1 degree Leo and 27 Gemini, these are both in that personal development phase of the circle, and very much about, you know, what is it that I'm going to express coming from the heart, Leo, and what am I maybe going to communicate about with myself, Gemini? In what ways am I going to allow myself to experiment with this and play with this, and let this purification of my desire nature and relationship needs, in what way am I going to allow it to be fun? Let the purification be fun and freedom oriented. So these are just some suggestions as to how this can be showing up for you. And of course, if you've got something in your chart on any of these points, use that as actually like an anchor to integrate this experience for you. Okay, this is an example of what you can do, of like the level of detail and analysis. You could probably even go deeper than this, but what I did was found all of the aspects to the original conjunction at 4 degrees 6 minutes Virgo. And so of course you're going to notice with these numbers, a lot of them are going to be the same degree points, except for the semi-squares and the sesquiquadrats, but then they'll be the same numbers. But it just basically goes through what are the phasal relationships in relation to this original conjunction. Now, you can take this and screenshot it and use these dates as you will. You know, sort of coming back from this August 24th, we've already passed this, so I didn't write those dates down. But the next thing we have between transiting Venus and that original conjunction is the first quarter square, which is November 4th. And so you can just observe what happens at 4 degrees Sagittarius. This is coming up pretty soon, like next week. And then, you know, going through the list. I would suggest you do this with your own chart and in relation to your own natal Venus and Mars and other points in your chart, and kind of make a list so that you can understand the dates, you can understand the timing, because it's a lot easier, in my opinion, South Node Virgo here, to sort of map it out and have a strategy ahead of time so that you just know the dates. Like, you don't have to know what it's going to mean. Don't even worry about that prediction unless you're at that point in your practice, but just have the dates so that when they happen, now you can go back and write in, how did you feel on that day? And this is how we master our cycles. This is how we master our transits. It's not about, you know, taking that information out of a book and it's like, this means this on this day, and that's true for everybody. There's no way that's even possible. So it, you know, in terms of really integrating and incorporating our intuitive skills, we need to have this balance of like, oh, I've already got the list, so now I don't need to think about it when I'm in this channeling space and I just want to write about how I'm feeling. So just a strategy here. And also, you know, that's what this Venus-Mars conjunction in Virgo is all about. Like, how are we using our strategies, these incredible minds that we have, to make it easier on ourselves? We have these tools, let's use them. Okay, did the same thing with, you know, the full phase opposition and the whole waning side of it until the very next Venus-Mars conjunction is July 13th, 2021 at 19 degrees Leo. Okay, so these could be, really fascinating collective dates. And then you could layer these dates in with your personal dates and how it applies to you personally. Okay, same thing with Mars. Here's some big dates. Now Mars moves a lot slower than Venus, so this is all stretched out a little bit. Again, coming back to that next conjunction in Leo. Okay, so coming back to this example chart, now how does everything else that we've just layered in tie in? I could have made it like a double chart here to make it more clear. Yeah, good, I did that, yay. I love it when my strategies work out. Okay, so this doesn't have the nodes involved, but you can take that into consideration for yourself, just really understanding what's going on and how is this going to be manifest. So for her, this entire conjunction is about finding that purity of relationship and how does it affect in her career, what she puts out in the world, her reputation. She's been a nurse for so long and for the past decade, and has been very practical and had this routine and had this schedule that was like clockwork. Now she's got a baby. That's gonna kind of throw off the pattern a little bit, but how does it all come back to this sort of understanding how she's actually becoming and embodying a lot more of the divine feminine, and that's actually what's being put out in the world. So it's very exciting. She's a beautiful mother. Okay, and so this is her Mars return. And so this is happening pretty soon for her, November 28th. Some of the timing might not be exact, but more or less, when transiting Mars returns to your natal Mars, this is always a time of that reseeding of, initiation and activation and triggering. And usually we're not fully aware of what that means when Mars is on top of Mars, right? We're still feeling into the instinctual emergence of that connection. And then you start to see what it really means, especially as it as it moves down here. And then this is also right before her Venus return, which is happening December 2nd. So these are happening within 4 days of each other, where her transiting Venus returns to natal Venus. So again, this will be an interesting time for her to kind of see in what ways she's being triggered or activated in terms of her self-expression and knowing what she's becoming, her self-discovery and all those things, and her needs, her resource needs, and what is shifting in her structure and how she needs to reevaluate her structure of life, perhaps her finances, all of those things, taking a whole other being into consideration, right? Especially now with the South Node here, it's like, lucky for her, this is a really positive expression and this sort of like karmic fruition, because she's been working hard for a really long time, and now she kind of gets to sit back and relax and rest, which is not common for her. She doesn't really know how to rest that much, it's usually work. She works a lot, and now she gets this a little bit more ease here because she's worked for it. Okay, this is transiting Venus opposite the Venus-Mars original conjunction, so at 4 degrees Pisces. And so now this will be in her 4th house. This will be this time, in January 2020 of like, whew, wow, halfway through the cycle in terms of what I'm attracting, right? That Venusian attraction, point of attraction and values, and perhaps, maybe surrendering, Pisces, releasing some of the patterns that she doesn't really need in order to, really be present with her child and be more present with her family and be more present with her emotional needs for herself, rather than just like what she is needing to do and put out in the world. It might be coming into more focus on self. Same thing here. Well, not same thing, different thing. We're just going to keep moving. Transiting Mars conjunct natal Venus. This is also a point I would suggest you look at, because this will show what is being initiated or activated or triggered in relation to values, right? And so maybe, when Venus was here, she would have been feeling into it and really looking at her reactions. And that would be how she's understanding what new seeds and of divine intention and needs are being seeded. But with Mars, it'll be the same thing. Now it's like, oh, what am I going to do about it? In what ways am I going to take different kinds of action on my needs and values? This is when we've got transiting Venus in the last quarter square to the original Venus-Mars conjunction. And so for everybody, this is occurring April 8th, but it'll depend on where you have 4 degrees Gemini in your chart. And looking at Mars hasn't even hit that opposition point yet. But this is a good point, just, to be able to look at where Venus and Mars are, and do you have sensitive points around any of these angles or any of these aspects? And that'll kind of show, oh, those points are likely to be more obvious trigger spaces, initiation, activation spaces and times. So here we have Mars, transiting Mars, opposite original conjunction, and this tends to be, again, when we're like fully aware of what it is that we're doing and what we're working on. Sometimes we can start to get like a little bit tired around this point, because we've been working on it, but we also want to pay attention to what is the phasal relationship between natal Mars and transiting Mars, right? This is a nice trine. So for her, she's probably going to be pretty energized at this time. And usually when we have transiting Mars in opposition to our natal Mars is when we kind of feel this like, whew, completed something, and now I need to make it less about what I'm doing, and it becomes more about what am I doing with other people. So, and for her that will make a lot of sense too, because transiting Mars will be in her 7th house at that time, like around here. And so this is interesting too, because she's going to have a whole other Venus return before Venus and Mars even come together again. And then here's the next Venus-Mars conjunction at 19 degrees Leo. And so for her, that will also be in her 10th house, but different degree, different sign, and a little bit closer to her south node. And so that will be an interesting one to navigate for her. But you can apply the same formula with your own chart and with transits to really understand just what is happening with your needs and what you're going to do about them. So again, master this chart. Just master it. Commit it to memory. I don't like to say that too often in astrology, but there are just certain things that this is going to make your life easier when you have this committed to memory, and like knowing, oh, there's 2 different kinds of inconjuncts or quincunxes. One is gibbous or like Virgo. One is full phase, which is like Scorpio, right? Totally different energies completely. There's 2 different kinds of trines. There's the first quarter crisis and action trine. There's a disseminating more about society and what society wants from you. And it's like very fruition, Sagittarius like kind of trine compared to a Leo trine, right? And so on, 2 sextiles, 2 squares, 2 different kinds of conjunction, 2 different kinds of opposition. So here's just a recap on the formula. So look at the original conjunction. This way you know the core intention of the entire cycle, and you can relate that back to your own chart and transits. Know your essential relationship needs and be able to verbalize them. I've spoken to so many clients where I ask, what do you need in a relationship? And the answer is most of the time, I don't know. My thoughts are that you do know, and that it's just becoming more comfortable with the languaging around them, and also releasing any resistance on just verbalizing where you are now, because there's nothing fixed about our needs and our desires and our values, and there's nothing fixed about even like what we verbalize. It's not like this like spell that's going to be cast if you say something and it ends up changing later. But if you're able to verbalize it now, you can work with it now. And you can become more aware of, all of the subconscious patterns that are linked to those patterns of relating in past lives and all of those things. So be able to verbalize your needs to yourself, and then learning your partners in a way, learn what their essential relationship needs are, and how to have conversations about it, especially with, this original conjunction being Virgo. So we need to be clear in the conversation with ourselves about our essential relationship needs, but we then will be able to take it into a conversation with others, and everything will just make a lot more sense. And when you're able to communicate with people from that space of authenticity, breakups, if they need to happen, are not challenging, not as challenging, because both people will be aware that, oh, the time has come. Or if you're in a new space and you're trying to navigate the frontiers of a new relationship, the more we're comfortable communicating about these things, especially if you feel like other people don't understand, or like you're into astrology and they're not into astrology, it's not about the astrology. You don't have to tell anybody, oh, this is about Mars and Venus, right? You don't even have to have that conversation with them, but you can make it clear, what are your needs? What are your values? What do you want? What have you noticed about yourself and how your wants and needs are changing? What is it that you feel that you are here to become? And how do you feel that that can, in a way, be served in your relationships? And then vice versa. What do you think that you have to offer to a relationship with another person? So good information to have about yourself. This is where, you know, some of the like nitty gritty strategy homework comes out, like map out your transits, know when they're hitting key points in your chart, look at the core aspects, reflect on when you've gone through these similar aspects before, right? We get to have Mars return every 2 years, Venus return every year, more or less. We should be able to go back to these key points in our life and say, this is what was going on at that time. This is how I dealt with it. And this is how I can like do it better. I put that in air quotes because I do wholeheartedly believe that we are always doing our best, but how much better we can do when we have a little bit more information and conscious and intention and attention on these cycles. And lastly, but most importantly, you need to participate. And so this is, to me, how we actively love what is, right? We are in a relationship with our evolution itself, and we are participating objectively. And you may ask, how to be objective about something so personal like our wants and needs? And my response to that is to understand that, for one, it's all bigger than us, right? We have our own individual expressions of the divine, but the divine is bigger than all of us and holds all of us. Everything is always in divine order. And we chose all the major structures of our life so that we could learn through these very, like, you know, subjective realities, so that we could see the divine from our perspective, but we're not alone in that. And it's all part of this bigger plan, right? So that's a perspective that can maybe help you to be objective. It's like also what you are learning and mastering and healing and clearing in yourself in relation to Mars, Venus, you're also doing that for the planet, right? Because when you become more clear, you feed that information and that healing back into the collective unconscious, and then it comes back to you. It's this very synchronistic, interpersonal cosmic dance that we're doing. It's never just about us by ourselves. It's always about us in relation to the rest of all that is. And another thing too, know your core evolutionary intention. Know your Pluto polarity point, know your north and south node. Know what it is that you're really here to do, and then be able to put that into a couple sentences too. It doesn't mean that putting into those sentences is like the totality of what you're here to do. It can't be, right? But here in this third dimension, or fourth or fifth dimension, wherever you're existing, to be able to verbalize and put into language your evolutionary intention, and even as it evolves itself and your awareness of it evolves, this is going to be the basis of, you know, decision making and making choices in relationships, and really coming up with a method for making choices that really, you know, is from the heart, right? Involve your heart in this. Involve your whole body, all of your bodies, your astral body, your etheric body, right? Your higher self, your guides. Involve everybody, all of this in this heart-centered choice making. And that's how you can become more objective. So I'll just leave you with this quote again. Your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. Many blessings and so much reverence and gratitude and appreciation for you wherever you are on your conscious evolutionary journey. Namaste.